everybody, and welcome back to the inn. Now, we're a little behind on these, so we're going to try to get these out a little bit more regularly so that we are caught up with, Kobolds and Catacombs and all that stuff by the time the next set releases. But we'll see how it goes. So, like we did for Journey to Un'Goro, we're going to do the top 20 Knights of the Frozen Throne cards. Eddie and I hashed it out, fought. There was a lot of blood. Not so much as with Un'Goro. I think we're starting to get the hang of how these negotiations work. So there's a little bit more give and take this time around instead of the millions upon millions of loops. We were pretty much able to kind of just hash it out into, I think, a list that we're kind of both reasonably agree on. Yeah. So hopefully Kobolds and Catacombs is a little bit easier to hash together the list, but essentially we saw about enough time in the meta to see which cards were truly meta defining, which ones were the best of the best. We hashed it out to the top 20 cards, the 20 best cards in the Frozen Throne set, and then because we're not doing it in any particular order, and we didn't even rank them, I then further randomized it by taking those 20 cards and throwing them into random number sequencer. So I have the random list here. Eddie knows what cards we're going to talk about, but not in what order. So essentially, I'm going to throw out the card as it kind of pops up. Eddie will give his first thoughts on it. I'll kind of go after that. There might be a little bit back and forth, whatever. But we're going to be talking about the top 20 cards in Knights of the Frozen Throne. Ready, Eddie?
Alrighty, let's rock and roll with this one.
Alright, so first up is Righteous Protector.
Oh my god. Alright, so this little number, I would have to say, especially even now, if you're an odd Paladin deck, or just even back during Knights of the Frozen Throne, this was your turn one drop. Just plink, you throw it out there as Paladin, and just it hits and sticks to board. You pass turn after that. And it was just that good and that great of a card that you could actively play it. Heck, there were times where you could play it on turn 7 alongside your Spike-Ridged Steed, or if you wanted to, you could also play it next to Sunkeeper Tarim to give yourself a 3/7 with Taunt and a 3/3 with Taunt and Divine Shield. This thing was ridiculously and incredibly strong, and even now with like Call to Arms for an aggro deck, having this thing pop out, super nice, super legit. Still a very good and very strong card.
Yeah, as we kind of saw with Firefly last time around, a card doesn't have to be mind-blowing to make our list. If it's fairly consistent, essentially it's a very solid minion in its own right, and it basically can go the distance, and just in certain circumstances carry its weight or hold its weight, it's worthy enough to be considered on this list. Righteous Protector essentially is the go-to early game Paladin card. It's a 1/1 Divine Shield with Taunt is just very solid. We saw that with an Oiotron that was a 2-cost 1/2 with Taunt. Basically having an early game minion that can essentially hold its own while you prepare whatever you have to prepare in the background is just incredibly strong. It doesn't have to do a lot of damage. It doesn't have to eliminate a lot of minions. It just needs to hold the fort for just a turn or two for you to do whatever you need to do. And that level of consistency makes it a very powerful card in the long run. So that's why it deserves that spot on the list. Next up is Prince Keleseth.
Yeah. Prince 2 in Rogue in freaking Spiteful Druid / Druid. Just, this card really helped define and puff up Rogue / Tempo Rogue in its heyday and in its big prime light. Don't get me wrong, Tempo Rogue is still a thing that is kind of still around today. But this thing just, like, on first glance, when it was first revealed, I was like, what are you gonna do with this thing? This thing is just not even, like, and I had to be sold on the idea. And then the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta came around, and I'm just like, well, there it is. I'm sold on it, and it turned out to be an incredibly strong card, crawling into kobolds, and even now flying around in the Witchwood. So, if anything, you can never take a card at this point and look at it at just face value and go, alright, just trash, burn it. You gotta kind of give it a minute to get in the washing machine, in a sense, and just start going around and just like, alright, boom, this is where it lands. So, Bob, I'm throwing that back to you.
I think what's really interesting about this legendary is when it was first announced and when there was a lot of card breakdowns, essentially it was relegated to the trash tier. And it really looked like that was essentially a good call for the beginning part of the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta. This card did not take off right away. It along with the rest of the princes were essentially garbage. It wasn't until the Druid nerfs that lessened the power of the Druid package, Jade Druid in particular, with Spreading Plague and the like, that Kel'Seth actually had a chance to shine. And all of a sudden, this card comes out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's in every single deck. It's in almost every single deck. It's all over the place. And it just became incredibly powerful overnight. This was like in the middle of the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta, before we got to Ngoro. And this card is a good reason why we don't even consider doing the top 20 listing until the next expansion, until at least the next expansion is hit. Because by the time Kobolds and Catacombs hit, Prince Kel'Seth has shown itself to be a very scary legendary, and essentially a meta-defining legendary in its own right. Something that could not have been called if we did a list like this a month after this expansion released. It's why even if we catch up with our supposed top 20s and do Kobolds soon afterwards, we're not even going to touch Witchwood until after the next expansion releases, because we don't know what exactly is good and what is not, and what are the true meta definers until that point, because anything can happen. And Prince Kel'Seth is an example of it. It's still incredibly useful today. It still can control the metagame today, depending on your deck. A lot of mid-range decks run this. There are a lot of aggro decks that run this still. So it still has a huge part in the meta. It's not as oppressive or not as numerous as it once was, but it still exists. And it's something that we didn't see until after a round of nerfs. So we do know there are some nerfs coming within the month, as far as when we're talking about this now. So when we're looking at the Witchwood, don't write off anything yet, because if Prince Kel'Seth is an example, whatever nerfs Blizzard hands out might cause another card to actually have its chance to shine, and might allow that, whatever that card is, to make the list whenever we cover the Witchwood.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is Blood Reaver Gul'dan.
Ay. Like, on first go around, because we really didn't get to see it because of Kibler burning the daggone thing during the live stream, which he'll never live it down. Which, if anything, lives in, of course, Hearthstone infamy at this point for the rest of Hearthstone's days.
That's okay. Kibler is fine, because even though he burned Blood Reaver Gul'dan, it's still better than whatever Cloud9 was doing.
Anyway, when it comes to Blood Reaver Gul'dan, this thing is, and still to this very recording, is a disgusting legendary. To where right now it's on the potential chopping block for at least getting hit by a nerf. Because it's that powerful. You're getting a board full of demons back, and then you're also resurging by being able to heal yourself for 3 and deal 3 damage to your opponent or something on the board. This was the starting point of Warlock's climb back into the upper and higher tiers. Bar flippin' none. And then we had kobolds, and then it just went full on head dive. So, just Gul'dan was disgusting. Oh.
Yeah, out of the Death Knights, this was a very strong one. I called that the hero powers are going to be very strong in the first place. I underestimated how strong the battle cry was going to be, just because getting a few choice demons back is still incredibly powerful, even if it's not a full board or whatever. You don't really need to run a demon package or a demon deck to actually get a decent return from the battle cry. The thing is that this card wasn't nearly as oppressive before Kobolds and Catacombs. Sure, it was good, but if it wasn't for Kobolds and Catacombs, it might not have been good enough to make the list. I'm going to be that honest. But then Q-Block happened. And Q-Block changed everything, and Blood Reaver Gul'dan just allowed the deck to just sustain itself. So just being able to just bring Warlock into that place into the meta to just become oppressive, yeah, we have to consider the Death Knight that makes it all possible to just keep on sustaining itself.
And if anything, let's not forget, it also made it to where Zoo was also an impressive, or at least a more impressive deck as well, because it was able to bring back your Doom Guards, as well as giving you that late/in-game sustainability.
Yep. Next up, we have Drained Soul.
Well, if anything, we're sticking in the Warlock area, so when it came with Drained Soul, very early on, of course, this sucker was good. You combined it with Tainted Soul, and you just went, alright, I'm gonna lifesteal for 2, 3, whatever. Sometimes it gives you that edge that you really needed. To just be able to just take something, plink it off the board. That's all you really needed with Drained Soul. So everything, oh.
This is one of those that, looking at the list a little bit now, this is probably right on the edge of being accepted or not. But here it is. It's probably one of the weaker entries. But it is still a very solid card. It helped Warlock essentially control the board and control Warlock to really shine during Knights of the Frozen Throne. Now, it kind of fell out of favor when Q-Block came around, but, it's still a very solid card in its own right. And essentially, to kind of give you it kind of gives you an idea of how Warlock got into the position it is now. Yeah, it's not really being played a whole lot anymore, but back during the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta, Warlock was playing the sucker. Next up, we have Spreading Plague.
Oh man, the card that had to go from being a 5 cost to a 6 cost. Because it was just that powerful and making Druid incredibly overpowered when this Knights of the Frozen Throne set hit. I mean, this was a thing, and it still is a thing, that was the aggro clog hammer. Oh, you're gonna go wide on board with all this aggro stuff? I'm just gonna play Plague on 5/6 and then just watch my board just sit here and grow. Okay? Just gonna sit here now. Get around this wall of taunt. Have fun. And it's just originally I didn't think it would find a place in Jade Druid, and it did. Because it's just, it was just so good. It shored up one of Jade Druid's weaknesses, which was aggro. So it's just, I still get that just little bit of nasty taste in my mouth when I was playing Jade Druid in the Knights meta, because it's like, even I was disgusted with myself, and I played Jade Druid throughout its entire livelihood, from Mean Streets of Gadgetzan right up until rotation. So, if anything, this is one of the cards in this list that just gets that disgusting taste in my mouth. Ball.
Yeah. Pretty much this took care of the aggro problem for Druid. They're able to kind of delay aggro decks enough to basically allow for Druid decks to allow themselves to have a little bit of a breather to get ready and ramp up to where they need to be. This really helped Jade Druid, but they also helped out pretty much every other Druid deck. Jade's, of course, is going to be, we have to pay a lot of attention to, because anything that helps Druid in particular, it would definitely help Jade's the most. And Spreading Plague was hit with the nerf bat because of that. Now, it still didn't make it a bad card. Far from it. It's still a very solid card. And actually, and here's the thing. In my opinion, though, I don't think it's the card that was responsible for for eliminating Jade's weaknesses. Yes, it shored up its weakness against aggro, but it's not the one that I thought was the most problematic, although it was the one hit with the nerf bat. We will be talking about that card later on, and I will explain why I think that card is problematic. I thought Spreading Plague was fine. It's still annoying, and it still works as a 6-drop, so it wasn't that bad of a nerf, but the nerf did, changing Spreading Plague actually did kind of affect things. Yes, Druid still ran things, but it allowed new decks to come into the meta, such as the Keleseth decks. So we can't say that the change in Spreading Plague, it didn't affect the metagame at all. In fact, it affected it a great deal, so that this list itself was changed. And Spreading Plague is still a very solid choice in Druid decks to this day.
Yeah, and that's why if anything, I said it was one of the cards that helped short up that weakness. So it was one, but the other one, whoo.
Next up is Shadow Reaper Anduin.
I have to say that when it came right down to it, because, like, there were two Titans, I would say, in the early on days of Knights of the Frozen Throne. You had Druid and you had Priest. These two Titans clashed.
Clash of the Titans, you say?
Very much Clash of the Titans, because it was just Shadow Reaper Anduin would hit board. And depending on if you already had dropped Razakus, or excuse me, Raza the Chain, not Razakus, because Razakus was the deck that really prompted this ideal for making Shadow Reaper Anduin incredibly powerful. Because it was just, alright, I'm going to take my hero power, make it 0, and then just start infinitely spamming spells. And tapping and hitting my opponent in the face until they're dead. it gave way to make not Prince, but Prophet Velen, a card that you really didn't get to see have much prominence when it came to Hearthstone until really Knights. So, if anything, I give kudos and applause to Shadow Reaper Anduin for bringing about a highly underrated / underappreciated legendary, for that matter, into the metagame light. So, well done to you, Shadow Reaper Anduin. You didn't get hit with the Nerf bat, but if anything, the card that did get hit, of course being Roz of the Chain, did get hit. So, kudos.
Yeah, Shadow Reaper Anduin. If there was any card that I think really defined Knights of the Frozen Throne, it'd be this card. Shadow Reaper Anduin was essentially the Death Knight. It helped essentially define an archetype. And I remember when we were talking, we were doing card discussions, that I said, I kind of see with Shadow Reaper Anduin a control problem that could be very scary. And I was that essentially that if a combo is done right, that it could essentially shut down a deck and be very frustrating to go against. What I was thinking of is I was thinking about Skulking Geist, killing off sustainability and 1-drops and the like, and then using Shadow Reaper Anduin to just eliminate the board and just continuously eliminate the board so that you were unable to do anything. That was what I kind of foreseen, and in a sense, it kind of happened. I really didn't factor Raza into it. I really should have, but I was kind of aware that something like that could happen with the card, and if it did, it would probably have a scary effect on the meta, and it did. So yeah, Shadow Reaper Anduin. For me, this card defined Knights of the Frozen Throne, for good or bad. If you're a priest, you had to at least consider it. Some priests did include it, but mainly if it was included in a deck, it was included with Raza, which made them more of one-offs. But yeah, it's a very solid card. Without Raza, you don't really see much of it these days. But for Knights On, it kind of helped define a meta, and it was a strong archetype. Or at least a notable archetype from Knights into Kobolds. Next up, we have Bone Mare.
Ooh. Another card that decided to kind of peek its head into many spots in many places. It had to be nerfed from a 7-cost to an 8-cost. Because it was one of those cards that was just incredibly strong and powerful where it landed and where it dropped. Like, Arena was one of the biggest and most disgusting places that this card could show up. And if anything, when you look at, like, Rogue and Paladin, that's where this thing was highly definitive and highly prominent. But it also had a few other places it kind of peeked its head in and went, hey guys, what are you doing over here? It was nifty. It's not as used anymore since it's gotten hit by the bat, which makes me a little bit sad, but at the same time, it's understandable as to why it doesn't get used because of its cost. So, Bob, I throw it to you.
This is just, can I just say this is just so entertaining to me? I say card and you're like, ooh, like the surprise just gets you. Oh, I didn't expect that.
No, it's just more or less, I know it is, but it's just, ooh. I enjoy discussing and things like that. So I'm just like, oh, that one, okay.
Yes, but let's talk about Bone Mare. Bone Mare was a must-include in almost every deck. And let's be honest, we really should have looked past the, well, these type of effects have never been played before type spiel, which Bone Mare broke us out of. Let's be honest. Bone Mare, we kind of learned from expansion of going, don't say never on some things, because, so we have to kind of judge things. But Bone Mare, giving a minion +4/+4 and taunt is incredibly powerful. It doesn't matter whether it's 7 or 8, it's still incredibly powerful. And Bone Mare essentially became a must-have, or a must-include, in pretty much every single deck. If you didn't have anything better to do, you put Bone Mare in. I think it's fallen out of favor, not because of the cost so much, that there are just better, stronger archetypes available, and with better cards available to do whatever you're trying to do, Bone Mare is just not as appealing in this type of meta. I think if certain archetypes or certain cards fell out of favor in the meta, Bone Mare could make a resurgence. So I'm not counting Bone Mare out. It's still a very solid card, and it's probably going to be a very solid card until it rotates out of Standard. It's just because it's just that good. It's just solid, and sometimes solid, you're just solid all around, that you become a must-have and must-include, that's the definition of meta defining. Next up is Frostlich Jaina.
Big spell mage. When I think Frostlich Jaina, that is the first thing that comes and clicks to my mind. In Knights of the Frozen Throne, yeah, sure, you had it here and there, but it really came on strong in Kobolds and Catacombs. And since then, Frostlich Jaina is still prevalent and around. And her Death Knight ability is just super good. Being able to just, here, I'm going to tap that creature that's at 1, and I'm going to get a free 3/6 elemental that costs 4 on the board. And I get lifesteal, so I get to just stay and heal up so much. Oh, by the way, another unappreciated / really unused for a good bit legendary that did get to be dropped in was Barongeddon.
I never thought I would ever see the day I would want to use Barongeddon in a deck.
Exactly. You never would think, this 7 costs 7/5 gives me a full heal because of the what. I'm gonna craft that. I'm gonna want that. I'm gonna use it in my deck.
I opened that years ago. It was like, I think, one of my early legendaries I got from Classic. I can't remember when I got it. I remember being disappointed, and I collect them. So I collect the cards, so it just sat in my collection. I'm like, going, yeah, I'm not going to use it. I'm never going to use this. And lo and behold, I actually wanted to use it. Just goes to show you.
Exactly. So if anything, that was all I had to say on it, and then, Bulb, was that all you needed to say on it?
Oh, I was going to say Frostlich Jaina, I think what's really interesting is, yeah, she's really stepped up and really shined recently since Kobold's on. But I think it was one of those Death Knights that really didn't. She just kind of slowly rose throughout Knights of the Frozen Throne. It wasn't anything major. It just happened slowly. It began where she was being included and played with here and there, and this she just started being included more and more and more as people started to realize the utility she had for sustaining herself in the long run. She didn't blow people's minds like Gul'dan or Anduin or any of these other Death Knights, but she's just very solid. Solid if your goal is to last and go into the end game. And I think that was something that players were starting to take notice of as we went into Kobolds, so that she rose up into prominence then. But it happened slowly. But the thing is, over time, they did see that she was a very solid inclusion into pretty much any mage deck. And pretty much a card like that is good enough to be considered for this list. Next up, we have Defile.
This. When you have to basically rework a singular card because, hang on, there's a possibility that players will abuse/exploit this card to the point of just nuking an entire board while still having a board and potentially infinitely just keep going on and on and on and on, we have a problem. So if anything, it was a good thing that they were at least a step ahead of the game on Defile and Dreadsteed combo. If anything, also given Q-Block, this thing was a huge, or this thing was and still is a huge staple for that deck. And Control Warlock, it's a huge staple. Zoolock isn't going to touch this, of course, because, well, it relies on board. And so you're not going to want to use Defile. But just, it's still around today. That's the biggest thing that I can definitely say. Oh.
It is probably one of the best board clear spells we have seen in a long time. It is probably the best spell that came out of Knights of the Frozen Thrones, and we had a lot of good ones. This is just very solid. You can pretty much put it into almost any Warlock deck, control mid-range, just to hold on to basically clear a board if you need to. It's I can't sing the praises of this card enough. It is that powerful. I think everybody realized how powerful it was going to be right from the get-go, and it kind of proved everybody right. Next up is Cobalt Scalebane. I'll get it out.
I was about to say, you are not welcome here. This thing not only gave Dragon Priest another little bit of oomph, but it also gave tempo decks and decks that could keep a sizable board a secondary, or at least another tool to put in their toolkit at 5. Very strong, very useful. So if anything, props and kudos to that card right there for sticking around even now as a card in Odd Rogue, or Baku Rogue, or whatever you want to call it. So, well done and well played by that card.
It really pushed the aggro archetypes, because this, along with Bone Mare, this was a card you kind of want to include. It wasn't an auto-include like Bone Mare, but it did show up an awful lot. It could be slotted into almost any deck, and it was a threat. You had to take care of it. You had to take care of it as soon as possible, because it could just create big dudes. Not only did you have to take care of that, you also had to take care of whatever it buffed up. So you had to constantly be on guard for Cobalt Scalebane, because it could snowball if you left it unchecked. So very solid minion, very scary minion, something that you had to deal with. Next up, we have the Lich King.
Day 1 craft was what I said when we discussed this card back during Knights of the Frozen Throne card discussion. When I saw it on stream, I was like, Day 1 craft. And it still continues to be a prominent 8-drop in the metagame today. If you get it off your Spiteful Priest, or excuse me, Spiteful Summoner, not Spiteful Priest, but it does come into play in Spiteful Priest for that matter. It is super good. Taunt Druid now uses it, and just, it's a solid 8-drop in just about any deck. You cannot go wrong with the big man himself, the Lich King.
I think it's a very solid card. This is actually a legendary that, and maybe this was just my whole reaction to the Knights of the Frozen Throne. I didn't think it was that great in the expansion. But I felt that Lich King was a card that we were very excited about, but then as play continued, I felt that just it ended up being overhyped and underwhelming as a card. Yes, it was a very solid card, but it wasn't the must-include that everybody hyped it up to be. It pretty much fell out of the must-include favor, and while a lot of people would include it in their decks, it wasn't Dr. Boom, I have to put in my deck. So it went from, oh, I must craft it immediately because this is going to be the next meta-defining card to, if I have room, I'll include Lich King. And for that I still have to look at and say, this was a card that I still look at and I think that, while decent and while solid, I think is just very underwhelming. It promised to be the defining card, and it ended up being anything but. But for what it is, for how solid it is, we really couldn't think of a reason not to include it in the list. It still is a defining and a solid card, so it did make the list. But it's not as prominent as a lot of the other cards on this list. So, yeah, it's a decent legendary. It wasn't the amazing one we were led to believe.
Don't forget about the boss fights.
Oh, the boss fights are another matter. Next up, we have Eternal Servitude.
Big Priest. You say Eternal Servitude, I say Big Priest. Chihuahua. That just... Alright, I'm gonna play Barnes, and then whatever gets vomited on the board, I'm gonna use Eternal Servitude to bring it back. And then just watch as you sit there and go, ah, crap, I gotta figure out how to work around what just came back onto the board because I just eliminated it. Ah! Super powerful card, super powerful, that in Wild I know is still played because Big Priest is still played in Wild. But as of now, it's honestly fallen off of favor. It could come back come next expansion or the expansion afterward before being rotated out. So I don't count it fully out just yet. Hold on.
Unlike the Lich King, this one, when I looked at it and said it's going to be meta-defining, it really was meta-defining. Because a resurrect ability that you actually have a choice in is incredibly powerful. Doesn't matter whether you're playing Big Priest or not. You have a choice in what you bring back. And if you build your deck in the right way, it's incredibly powerful and overwhelming. I think this one was easy to see that it was going to be on a power level all its own. It's just a more solid Resurrect, and there's no reason for you to play Resurrect ever again, even in Wild. I mean, you could maximize your Resurrect abilities, but Eternal Servitude is leagues better that it is the de facto Resurrect card for Priest. Next up, we have Spirit Lash.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. This baby. Because I looked at it, I'm like, yep, it's common. You're going to include it in your Priest decks. It helps shut down aggro, or at least some aggro decks early. Plus the lifesteal ability. Still seen a little bit here and there today. But this thing is just... And it will be until at least it rotates out, a threat to your aggro playstyle. So, if anything, Spirit Lash, good card, great card in the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta, still even good in it today. Oh.
I think what really helped bring Spirit Lash up so that I could make the list was the Rosakus archetype, because Rosakus needed to find ways to heal itself, and with the multitude of ways that the Rosakus Priest deck could actually create spell damage or increase the damage and healing of Spirit Lash was just phenomenal. They could use it to help wipe a board or do some damage so that they can then pick things off, And they also healed. That was what was so powerful about Spirit Lash, was when it was used in those circumstances. I think otherwise, Spirit Lash probably would have not really been a blip on anybody's radar. But I think in those circumstances, that's what made it so powerful. Next up, we have Malfurion the Pestilent.
Super duper uber powerful. When it was first dropped, I was like, man, this thing isn't going to go into Jade Druid. Boy, was I wrong. Oh, God, was I wrong. Even now, this is one of the more prominent and still dominant to this very day Death Knights that came out of Knights of the Frozen Throne. No questions asked. I don't even need to explain why it's so good and powerful. You just look at it and you go, yep, that's a good Death Knight. And that's why it's in the top 20.
I know that we have arguments every once in a while when we talk about what is the best Death Knight from the set. For me, it has always been Malfurion the Pestilent. I think I was the one that actually thought and considered that Malfurion would actually be included in Jade Druid. I actually said he could be included in any Druid deck because his effect and his ability is just so solid. Unlike Gul'dan at the time, I thought that his battle cry was actually just solid no matter what. It didn't lean towards one archetype or the other. It allowed you to do what you wanted to do. It gave you choices and options, and it actually worked very well with a card that was already included in a lot of Druid decks at the time, including Jade Druid, and that was Fandral. It plays nicely off of Fandral, and the hero power is just incredibly solid and powerful. You get your choice of more armor, aka life, or whether you want the attack to either attack face or attack a minion. It was just very versatile, just very solid, and while it wasn't supposed to blow anybody away, I think that's why it's so good, because all the other Death Knights can be very circumstantial. You can't just look at most of these Death Knights and say, yep, that can go into pretty much any deck of this class. With Malfurion, you can. It wasn't built to blow anybody away. It wasn't supposed to have a huge swingy turns. It was just built to be very solid that could be placed pretty much anywhere and still find a home in Druid. And that's why I think it's so powerful, and that's why I think it deserves a spot on this list, and why I personally think it's the best Death Knight in the set. Next up, we have Skulking Geist.
I just like that drop off. Just next up, we have Skulking Geist. God, I don't remember the rant. 10 minutes. 10 minutes of Bulb ranting his and my eardrums off, going off about this card because of how prominent and powerful it could have been. In the end, it really didn't go off, to be perfectly honest, and become the big scary boogeyman. Granted, yes, it was played, and even to now, there are points to where you do see Skulking Geist kind of popping and cropping up because of particular decks in the meta, like Taunt Druid and Q-Block, to just kind of hit those one-cost cards that are in those decks. Now, I'm going to laugh my little head off probably because if they decide to up certain cards for quote-unquote nerfing, then you look at Skulking Geist and you just go, can't, you're not really as useful as you used to be now, are you, little buddy? This thing was predicted as the quote-unquote Jade Druid killer. Don't get me wrong, it did hinder/clog Jade Druid a little bit, but it really wasn't the killer that it could have been. So if anything, Bulb, I throw this to you.
Well, I think we even said at the time that it wasn't going to be the Jade killer that people were hyping it up to be. that it wasn't really going to see the amount of play that people were hyping it, people were hyping up to be, and we were right. I think the only reason this card really makes the list is not because of what this card did, or basically that it was all included. It's just the fact that the threat of this card affected the meta. Just the existence of this card. It didn't have to sit in any decks. Just it existing changed and affected the meta. And that's good enough. If there were a lot more powerful cards where we had to make the choice, that might have gotten pushed to the side, but fact of the matter is, it didn't really have to do anything in order to influence the meta, and that's why it's on the list. Next up, we have Despicable Dreadlord.
Oh, my word. When I look at this, my memory flicks back to this being a good board clear. It was one of those things to where your mid-game, if you really, really needed it, you just played it and it was just like, alright, 1 damage to all the enemy minions, and then you just passed. It wasn't the big, like, humongous, oh my god, you gotta craft this like Defile was. But during its time and during its run, Despicable Dreadlord did have a very nice niche place in the metagame. I flick back to, I think, Zoo? But if anything, like during the Knights and the transition into Kobolds and Catacombs, my memory gets a little bit fuzzy because there was a lot going on for me at that time. So, as far as my Hearthstone playtime went, it was up in the air. So, Bolt, maybe you could give me a little bit of a refresher where Dreadlord was concerned.
I remember back in the winter of '02, I was I mean, you really. I'm sorry. I hate to pick on you. It's like you sound like come sit on the lap of old Grandpa Eddie as he regales you with his tales of Hearthstone days of yore.
Hey, shush your whore mouth, you. I was taking care of a baby at the time.
Well, you don't want my whore mouth anywhere near your baby.
No, I don't, but if anything, it was just more or less. I was taking care of a baby at the time. I shake my cane at you, my good sir.
Cranky Kong in the flesh. Anyway, Despicable Dreadlord. A good demon? What? It's just a very solid minion. Very solid demon. Has a decent AoE at the end. You can set things up to help clear things. It's just very solid, especially if it comes back with Blood Reaper Gul'dan. I mean, that's a lot of times, like I said, what we're looking for. That it can help define a meta of just, if all you need is a very solid minion with really no downsides, and that was Despicable Dreadlord. Alright, Eddie, regale us about your tales of Serenite Chain Gang.
How long can this go on? How long can this go on?
Apparently, pretty long.
Exactly. If anything, this thing, even now, is still very prominent and a very solid 4-drop in just about any deck you want to look at down the line. Evolved Shaman, I remember playing it for just a little bit. But if anything, this thing had its home more or less in Rogue. Because it was Serenite Chain Gang, and then you go Cobalt Scalebane, and then you do whatever else you want to do. And just, as a 4-drop, summoning 2 3/3s with Taunt? So good! So good. Well,
just very solid all around. I mean, yeah, Evolved Shaman definitely used it, but pretty much any deck that just wanted a mid-range option to just help stem the tide, Saronite Chain Gang was your go-to. It's just a decent inclusion in pretty much any deck. It gives you some board coverage, and if you survive, you can, just help push that a little bit more. So yeah, have to tip my hat to Saronite Chain Gang. Mainly it is the inclusion in Evolved Shaman, but just the fact that pretty much anybody was running this minion because it just is that good. Next up, we have Blood Racer.
I knew this one was coming up on the list because I'm just like, we're getting down to the wire here, if anything. This, in tandem with Sleep with the Fishes, was so damn good before Sleep with the Fishes got rotated into Wild. However, even now, this thing is damn good. Like, 4 cost, I'm gonna have my battle cry go off for my execute. And then with the death rattle, if I got it in me somewhere, just boom, take out that minion and then just, kind of power up my other minions, summon more Grim Patrons in Wild. I mean, if this would have been around during the Grim Patron highlight heydays, whoo, baby, it would have been nasty. Oh.
I think there's a lot of people who were poo-pooing this card when it first came out, calling it trash, whatever. And I think we rightly called it. Basically, we're saying, really? I think this is meta-defining. And the thing is, Warrior with Whirlwind abilities, yeah, the fact that the Whirlwind ability goes off twice with this deck or with this card, very powerful. It's just a very solid weapon. It does what Warrior wants to do, and out of all the cards of the set, surprise, this is the only Warrior one on the list, and the reason why is it's that good. It's a meta-defining card. And yes, Eddie was talking about Patrons in Wild. This card and was another card that wasn't on this list, but basically, I run this card a lot in my Patron deck. I started playing Patrons around the middle to the end of Knights of the Frozen Throne in Wild. It's become one of my new favorite decks in Wild. I love playing that deck. It's absolutely great, and Blood Razor helps make that deck. I even say it's probably better than Death Spite in that regard for doing what you want to do with the deck. So it's just a very solid card. It's a meta-defining card, and pretty much the only one Warrior really got here. Next up, we have Ultimate Infestation.
Yes! And if anything, you and I, if I remember correctly, looked at this and went, "Ugh, this is disgusting," when we were doing the card reviews for it. I also remember reading the forums when people were going on tangents about it, going, "Oh God, it needs a nerf." Yeah. Look, I understand why people were complaining it needed nerf because it made Jade Druid disgustingly powerful, especially because of basically the whole thing. You deal 5, you draw 5, you get the 5 armor, and you summon a 5/5. That's a lot in one 10-drop that isn't a legendary. You can run 2 of this daggone thing. And having it to where you can just throw in infinite Jade Idols? Ugh. This quickly replaced Gadgetzan Auctioneer in your Jade Druid package. So, if anything, and even now, you still see Ultimate Infestation being played because it is that strong of a 10-drop card. And not only that, but also it's an almost auto-include when you play, or want to play, Spiteful Druid. Because Spiteful Summoner, I'm going to grab this 10 mana card. I'm going to get me a 10 drop thingy, whether it be Deathwing, Emrys, Sea Giant, Tyrantus. There's one more 10 drop that I can't think of off the top of my head, but
Ultra Sword.
those are at least the prominent 4. So, Ultimate Infestation, ultimately disgusting, and ultimately one of, I would say, the best cards that has been released for Knights of the Frozen Throne.
I was talking about earlier how I felt that Spreading Plague wasn't the problem and wasn't the problem that really really caused Jade Druid to go nuts in Knights of the Frozen Throne. It really wasn't the card that was causing an issue. I said, now it is causing issues where aggro can't prey on Jade Druid, but it's not the card that's causing the most issues. And I still point to Ultimate Infestation to be the problem card in Jade Druid. Because prior to Knights of the Frozen Throne, Jade's and pretty much any big Druid deck had a particular weakness, and that had to do with ramp. So you could ramp, and you could ramp quickly, but that led to several downsides. Number one, basically the downsides had to be that if you were to ramp incredibly quickly from 1 mana to 8, 9, 10 mana, so that over the course of 3 or 4 turns that you ramped up incredibly as fast as you could, you were pretty much left with almost 0 board presence, and you were left with a dearth of cards. You did not have the card draw. So essentially, you could ramp up incredibly quickly, but by doing that, you left yourself wide open on the board, and you pretty much did not have any of the card draw. And that was the downside to ramping up as quickly as possible. So Druids had to really think when they were ramping or when they were playing ramp decks about how quickly they wanted to proceed, what they wanted to do. Jade Druid in particular. And this all came down to naturalize, not naturalize. And this all came down to Nourish. See, previously Jade Druid had essentially a choice with Nourish. You could super ramp, but if you super ramped with Nourish, you did not have the card draw or anything to really help get your game plan going. So most of the time, Druids, or Jade Druid in particular, kept Nourish around for extra card draw, not necessarily ramp. So Jade Druid is always in this situation of how quickly do I ramp so that I can start doing what I want to do. So do I ramp as soon as I can, and how quickly do I ramp to do what I want to do? But if I ramp too quickly, I will be low on cards. And this essentially helped regulate Druid, and Jade Druid in particular. Because they couldn't go incredibly quickly, because they ramped incredibly quickly, they were essentially kind of screwed. Because I remember when Eddie and I were testing out and messing around and trying to get our Jade Druid decks built when Meansters Gadgetzan came out. Both of us tried a ramp-heavy version of Jade Druid, and we found out it did not work because of those reasons. So we kind of had to build in a little bit of this and a little bit of that, where we could ramp, but we really didn't ramp too quickly. We pretty much relied on Jade Blossom and on the
Nourish?
No. 2 cost. Coin. And what?
Wild Growth.
And Wild Growth. So you relied on Jade Blossom and you relied on Wild Growth. You really didn't rely on Nourish or anything like that. You really didn't ramp super quickly because of those downsides. And it kept Jade Druid in check because they really couldn't get too big too quickly. And it took Jade Druid a while to start getting into that type of endgame, which allowed earlier decks or more mid-range decks the time they needed to kind of build a board presence to hit Jade Druid, so that Jade Druid really only preyed on the slower type of decks. They really couldn't cover that. Now, Spreading Plague helped cover a little bit of the aggro weakness, but even with Spreading Plague, if the ramp weakness was left, Jade Druid would not have been able to build up too terribly quickly, because there would be consequences that would essentially screw them over if they ramped that quickly. And then they got Ultimate Infestation. Ultimate Infestation single-handedly gets rid of all of those weaknesses of ramping. Instead of punishing ramping as quickly as possible, Ultimate Infestation rewards you for it. See, Druids before then really weren't ramping up quickly because they would be punished if they did so, no matter the benefits of doing so later on in their decks. Other decks would punish them. However, Ultimate Infestation, you would ramp up super quickly, you play Ultimate Infestation, and you basically all those downsides of not having anything to contest the board, or having card draw. Ultimate Infestation took care of that. It allowed you to nuke something or somebody's face for 5. It summoned a 5/5 on your board. It gained you 5 armor, which means that you could kind of restore yourself a bit, and you drew 5 cards. Now, I said that really the card is super powerful, and that for me, I would nerf it by getting rid of the card draw, because that would still punish players who ramped up to it, but still provide a decent enough reward. But the thing is, by having all of that, it doesn't matter how you change the numbers. The problem with Ultimate Infestation isn't the numbers. The problem is that Ultimate Infestation took what was a penalty for ramping too aggressively, and it completely eliminated it so that there was no downside to ramping as quickly as possible. And that is really what caused Druid to get out of control. So yeah, Ultimate Infestation is probably one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful card in this expansion. And pretty much it is so because it allowed Druid to get away with ramping as quickly as possible without means of punishment. And yeah, if it's not fixed, it's going to continue to be a problem for any ramp-centric deck for Druid in the future, especially if Blizzard wants to print more ramp cards, because Ultimate Infestation rewards Druid players for ramping up as quickly as possible.
If anything, I'm gonna just pick up where I left off in a sense, because it's just more or less. I'm flicking back, of course, to the Mean Streets days when Jade Druid was played. Jade Druid got out aggroed hard. So you had to figure out what you really truthfully wanted to do. Did you want to have your card draw for nerfs, or did you want to have your ramp so that way you can ramp into taunts, or at least only be able to try to put the hamper on the clog down in your aggro deck? Spreading Plague, one of the pieces in the puzzle that got put in to help with the aggro part of it. Ultimate Infestation, the second piece in that puzzle to make Jade Druid practically complete during the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta, and it just threw it up there incredibly high. Like I said, I felt even a little bit disgusted because I knew I was playing a high-end tier 1 deck in Jade Druid, but at the same time, I felt a little bit vindicated because of all of the times that I had to face freaking patches that didn't get its little nerf until it was rotating out of standard. And I still want to...
Eddie, that's another list.
I still want to ask the person, why then? Think we've got one last card to go?
Yep, Obsidian Statue.
Again, you say Obsidian Statue, or at least you say Eternal Servitude. I say Big Priest. Rolling this sucker off Barnes and then hitting that Eternal Servitude, and then towards the late/end game, being able to just drop N'Zoth and have multiple Obsidian statues hit the board, GG, biatch. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, Obsidian statue was a lot of people going, it's too expensive, but it was very solid. It was hard to remove in general, and if it gave Priest life as you're trying to remove it, so it helped Priest kind of sustain itself. It played into multiple archetypes, and when it died, it removed a minion from the board. It was just a very solid minion overall, and it just showed that if the minion was strong enough, it didn't matter how much it cost, it would get played. It pretty much should have been a hint to everybody going to Kobolds that Void Lord would be a thing. Just the fact that Obsidian statue was very strong, but yeah, it was a very solid minion for a priest, and multiple archetypes could use it, and it's just, I think, solid all around, which is why I think it still sees play. So yeah.
Heck, at some point, I think it's going to probably drop itself back in and just go, "Hi, I'm back. What are you going to do now?"
And yeah, those are our top 20 cards for Knights of the Frozen Throne. What do you guys think? Any cards that you think we missed or that we shouldn't have put on this list? What are your thoughts on the best Knights of the Frozen Throne cards? Any particular favorites? We're going to be trying to get some more of these out, maybe soonish. We'll see as we get things under wrap. I know we have to kind of plan out Kobolds and Catacombs and some other stuff. We'll probably have to talk about nerfs in the future. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. We will see you guys next time.